No man is a man until he has been a soldier. Freedom is never free. We must never forget why we have and why we need our military. These quotes from an anonymous writer brings us to another video on the new Tourist channel. Today, we will be talking about foreign military bases in Africa. The legitimate primary role of the military in any country is maintaining peace. It safeguards the well-being of the nation and its people. Depending on how you view it, having a foreign military presence on home soil can either be to make or to mar something. Africa often interacts with foreign troops, particularly those from Europe and the United States. As you know, Africa is home to numerous issues, many of which pose both local and global security threats. From the early beginnings, Africa has had its fair share of conflicts, much like the rest of the world. And like the rest of the world, it has required support from external states. It is important to note that, whether in the form of peacekeeping missions or hostile foreign threats, Africa has a history of interacting with troops that neither fly any of their indigenous flags nor have familiar military personnel. The African continent was largely colonized by Europeans, and therefore it is no longer a stranger to foreign military presence throughout its existence. Make sure you watch this video carefully to grasp the message we want to pass across. You will not regret it. Just hit the like button and subscribe to the new Tourist channel. Most African countries have at some point experienced some form of association with militaries from France, Britain, Germany, Portugal, Spain, and Italy. What is rather more interesting is the fact that armed forces from the world's most powerful militaries have also set their feet on African soil. All these countries, which undoubtedly have the world's most advanced and well-rounded armies, have piqued interest in some of Africa's military affairs. They also, at times, share common security threats with Africa, and have shown that they will be relentless in snuffing out any enemy that threatens their affairs, even if that threat is hiding in Africa. Out of the foreign countries that have established military presence in Africa, the US has the highest number of bases. Although not as prevalent as their European counterpart, the US military has set up bases in Africa to foster joint operations against its foes or to protect its interest, utilizing its sophisticated drones, radars, military vehicles, amongst others. Let us begin looking at some US-owned military bases in Africa, before those of other nations. 1. Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti. The Camp Lemonnier military base in Djibouti, owned by US forces, has been a site for war against terrorism in Africa. This base that lies in the eastern part of Africa was originally established as a garrison for the French Foreign Legion. It was later leased by Djibouti to the US in 2002. In May 2014, the then US President Barack Obama and Djiboutian President Gele signed a 20-year extension of the American lease at $63 million a year in rent. Among Horn of Africa nations, none has garnered more attention from world powers than Djibouti, which hosts at least 8 foreign military bases, including the US, France, Japan, India, and China. It is shocking to note that no African country has a military base out of the continent's borders. The primary reason is Djibouti's location at the southern entrance to the Red Sea, acting as a bridge between Africa and the Middle East. While the US has numerous outposts across Africa, the State Department says Djibouti has the only enduring military presence in Africa at Camp Lemonnier. 2. Manda Bay, Kenya. The Manda Bay in Kenya was set up by the US to train African partners, respond to crisis, and protect American interests. This resort location in Kenya has been used by US troops as a base of operation for several decades. In 2006, Manda Bay became an airfield with increased personnel, aircraft, and operations. On January 5, 2020, about 40 al-Shabaab fighters launched an attack on cooperative security location Manda Bay, causing the death of 3 American officials and destruction of 6 US aircraft. 3. Airbase 101, Niamey, and Airbase 202, Agadez, Niger. These 2 bases, located in the West African country, Niger, are operated by the US military as drone bases. The main mission of US forces sent here is to share intelligence, carry out surveillance, and obtain reconnaissance data, with allied and partner nations, and also to train local military units to deal with terrorists on the ground. According to the base's management, the presence of the Niamey and Agadez military bases has helped in calming down or completely neutralizing stifled terrorist activities in Niger. Next up, 4. The Multinational Force and Observers South Camp, Egypt. This camp, commonly known as MBFO, is a U.S. military base in Egypt, acting as a peacekeeping body in the Sinai Peninsula. MAFO is also used for researching infectious diseases and their prevention. The MAFO South Camp was created to ensure that resolutions of the 1979 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty between Israel and Egypt were being adhered to. One other important aspect to note is that the U.S. military owns and runs a naval research unit in Cairo, capital of Egypt, known as Namur. It is here that research on diseases usually take place. 5. Contingency Location, Cameroon. The U.S. contingency location in Garoua, the central town of the northern region of Cameroon, is a military base that was set up to assist Africa in fighting a common enemy. U.S. troops have always been deployed on missions here to aid the Cameroonian Defense Forces in their efforts to combat regional violent extremism, particularly Boko Haram threats that have been plaguing the country for close to 12 years now. Now, besides the U.S., Chinese military basing efforts abroad have become a topic of great international interest and scrutiny. The People's Liberation Army Support Base in Djibouti in the Horn of Africa is operated by China's People's Liberation Army Navy, commonly known by its acronym PLAN. It is PLAN's first overseas military base, built at the cost of approximately $590 million. The facility is expected to significantly increase China's power projection in the Horn of Africa and the Indian Ocean. China sees its facility in Djibouti as consistent with its obligations under the 2015 National Security Law, which calls for protection of strategic energy supply channels and citizens abroad. The heavily fortified Chinese base in Djibouti has an underground space of 23,000 square kilometers. Camp Turksum is another foreign military base located in Africa. It is also a defense university in Mogadishu, Somalia, owned by Turkey. Since its creation in 2017, the base serves as the main hub of the task force dubbed African Eagle, in which Turkey aims to train and prepare officers for her armed forces, thereby helping the Somalian government in its efforts to build a national military force that can sustain itself. Camp Turksum can train and house approximately 1,000 soldiers at a time. In 2023, nearly 5,000 Somali trainees graduated from the camp. As Somalia is under an embargo and cannot obtain military aircraft, the Air Force candidates are trained in Turkey instead. France's military presence in Africa has allowed France to always be at the heart of conflict resolution and management mechanisms in French-speaking Africa. Although their numbers have been cut in recent years, several French troops are still deployed in countries like Chad, Djibouti, Gabon, Ivory Coast, and Senegal. Amongst the French military bases in Africa, Djibouti houses the largest contingent. The French naval base of Djibouti, also known as the Naval Base of Heron, is located in the eastern part of the country and houses about 2,000 troops. The recent wave of coups in Africa has only made France strengthen its military grip on the continent. There have been growing protests against France's presence in Africa, where it has previously flexed its military might. French troops were recently expelled from Niger and Mali, and others are considering scrapping independence deals that led to at least 30 French direct military interventions between 1964 and 1995. Giving military support to friendly African regimes has also enabled France to project and protect her interests and mounted rapid armed interventions in the continent. For instance, the French Defense Ministry says its primary mission through operations in Gabon is to train soldiers in the region and boost their capabilities to combat terror, protect land borders and maritime territory. This involves peacekeeping, intelligence, and logistics. Germany's military presence in Africa is linked to its increasing military engagement in multinational operations. In Niamey, capital of Niger, Germany has established an air transport base, which provides operations and logistics support to its contingents in international missions in Mali. Under the umbrella of the UN and the G5 Sahel Force, and often alongside the French, Germany has made inroads into Africa, which have proven to be of great strategic importance. Germany has a presence at a French naval airbase in Djibouti, from which it patrols strategic sea lanes around the Horn of Africa. It conducts air patrols in support of an EU-wide mission to fight piracy. According to the German Federal Ministry of Defense, in 2019, German vessels escorted a total of 900 ships. Other German bases or training camps are located in North Africa and the Middle East. In Tunisia, Germany is actively training, advising, and supplying armed forces, providing radar and night vision equipment to aid in border patrol. In every case, the growing establishment of German and European presence in Africa is causing so many problems in the continent. All of Germany's military deployments are meant to counteract radical Islamic terrorism. The question is, are they doing so? Despite the works carried out by foreign militaries in Africa, some people argue that their presence is a way to compromise Africa's power, scramble for military presence, and gain geopolitical control. For many years, Africa has been teeming with foreign militia, with more than a dozen countries known to have deployments and bases on the continent. According to reports from the Institute of Security Studies, at least 13 foreign countries have military presence in Africa, and about 11 of them are installed in the Horn of Africa. Their main interest is to secure trade routes, project military and diplomatic capability, and to win friendly regimes in the subcontinent. The US and its allies such as France, UK, Germany, Italy, Belgium, amongst others, make up a large chunk of countries with a military presence in Africa. Bear in mind that unstable countries, particularly those ruled by authoritarian forces, are more receptive to foreign military bases and forces because it helps them stay in power. Examples include Niger, Chad, and Mali. Some critics add that the drive for military presence ties with colonialism and the desire for political power. Some Western powers also try to influence election results to ensure that have leaders who are more easily controlled. They don't want to break the chains of colonialism, so they can continue looting resources and ensuring economic dominance. Another Asian country, India, has increased its naval presence in Africa, creating a network of military bases around the Indian Ocean to oust China's expanding military influence in the region. The United Arab Emirates also has a significant military presence in Africa. Africa is the world's second largest continent in terms of both landmass and population, boosting abundant natural resources. The continent holds 30% of oil mineral reserves, 12% of non-oil reserves, 8% of non-natural gas, 7% of the oil reserves, and 65% of the world's arable land. However, the influence of Western multinational corporations and insufficient industrialization in many African countries have left the continent dependent on foreign nations. This dependency originated from colonial policies that focused on extracting raw materials perpetuated by post-colonialists. Economic dependency provides avenues for many European countries to manifest their influence on Africa. Right now, Africans are still dominated by these foreign European powers through their militaries and are expected to express gratitude to those providing donations or aid, even though most of the resources even originate from Africa. The presence of foreign military bases in Africa has caused tensions between various states. For instance, the presence of a Chinese base in close proximity to a US base in Djibouti has created geopolitical tensions. The US blocked a Russian base in 2014 and started a $1 billion upgrade of Camp Lemonnier. US government officials were also blindsided by Djibouti's approval of a Chinese base just 2 years later. Djibouti's President Ismail Omar Guelleh claimed that the US had a fixation about the Chinese base and complained incessantly that the Chinese were hampering their operations. The US Department of Defense issued a report in 2018 talking about instances of attacks against pilots flying near one of its bases, injuring 2 airmen. The Chinese Defense Ministry called the accusations untrue and asked the US not to swiftly speculate or make accusations. Some African leaders have called for the removal of these bases since they are considered as a divergence from the inter-imperialist campaigns that earned Africa freedom. Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser requested for the withdrawal of these bases in 1964, and the bases were withdrawn in 1970 after Libya's Muammar Gaddafi deposed the country's monarchy. However, no meaningful action has been taken in recent years to address the persistent presence of foreign military bases in Africa. The African Union's financial dependence on external partners, such as the European Union, limits its capacity to control the establishment of foreign military bases on the continent. According to Julius Malema, all French soldiers and militaries must leave the African continent, and this should also apply to neo-colonial militaries, including the United States Africa Command. We want an African army on African soil. We do not want foreign armies. European countries set up military facilities mainly in the Horn of Africa to combat terrorism and to discourage African migration to Western countries. By maneuvering the region, France's G5 Sahel initiative and the US drone base in Agadez want to curb migration. But are they doing so? Why can African leaders not concentrate on building the African army? According to political analyst Elizabeth Tefo, the reason for the establishment of foreign military bases in Africa is the strategic positioning for potential warfare. Superpowers aim to deploy their forces strategically so that in the event of conflict, they can have easy access to resources and ammunition. Do you think these foreign military bases are in Africa to protect it, or they are just in Africa as spies for their nations? Let us know what you think in the comment section. Encourage us to keep making videos like this for you by liking this video and subscribing to the New Tourist channel. Turn on notifications too, so you get notified whenever we upload videos like this. Thanks for watching, and see you in our next video.